The tax cartel. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. The race to the bottom. Well, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is trying to establish the world's first ever tax cartel. She argued for a global minimum corporate tax, says the Wall Street Journal. That would help prevent companies based in other countries from having a significant potential advantage. Quote, she says, "We've had a global race to the bottom in corporate taxation, and we hope to put an end to that," end quote. You want to ask Miss Yellen if she'd like to put an end to Walmart's race to the bottom for providing goods to poor people. What about the race to the bottom that Aldi performs when they're trying to sell food to poor people at lower prices? What about the race to the bottom between the 3 or 4 cell phone companies who are challenging each other and competing? Look, competition is good. Ms. Yellen doesn't seem to think so. Ms. Yellen seems to forget that corporate taxes are not paid by corporations. They're paid by the consumers of the products and services for whom the corporations make those products. Many of them are poor. So said simply, a corporate tax is a tax on the poor. She should realize this. Ms. Yellen continues, "The world needs a stable taxing system," she says. Now let's think about this. She wants a stable system, so she's going to raise the rate. Changing is stable? Stable is changing? So then if she wants to make it more stable, will she raise it again? You're beginning to wonder, which rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland have we fallen through? Or which session of 1984 are we considering right now? 1984 was the George Orwell novel about Oceania, a totalitarian superstate that is a setting of dystopian novel by George Orwell. But he was describing a totalitarian state. Are we in one? The article goes on to explain that competitive nature of American companies is not important, that equality with others is. That this is not in the Christian worldview. See, in the Christian worldview, we believe that people are made different. When they exercise those differences, competition occurs. It's competition that provides better and cheaper products for the poor, whom we are, as Christians, are concerned about. Ms. Yellen continues, "It is about making sure that governments have stable tax systems that raise sufficient revenue to invest in essential public goods and respond to crises, and that all citizens fairly share the burden of financing government." Well, we're glad that she at least admits taxes are a burden. Yes, they are a burden. And shouldn't they be lowered instead of increased? I point out in podcast 36 that cartels don't work. The reason they don't work is because they are competitors who are trying to collaborate. See, the first person to escape a cartel gets to sell their products or services at the highest price. The last one to escape sells their products and services at the lowest price. I explain this in podcast 36, and it's actually the best evidence that Jesus was Christ. If it really was a cartel between his apostles, 11 of the 12 would not have died martyrs' deaths. They did, because it was not a cartel. They did not have an agreement on anything. They lived with Jesus and believed he was the Christ. Ms. Yellen says, America first should never mean America alone. Look, America should be competitive, Ms. Yellen. That's what has produced the greatest economy in the history of the world, is competition. And it's competition via free market capitalism that has enriched the poor. Taxes are stealing. If somebody came into your home and took 20% of your groceries and 20% of your furniture, that would be considering stealing, and it would be a violation of one of the 10 commandments. Taxes are expropriated against your will. Are they stealing? Yes, as a matter of fact, they are, and I explained that very carefully in some other podcasts. Why do we allow it then? We allow it because we're in a fallen world. See, Christians believe God created a perfect world. Fallen humans have messed it up. We find redemption through Jesus Christ. In this fallen nature, we have to have taxes, because we have to have taxes to fund police and fire, because it's a fallen world. But the higher they are, the worse it is. Ms. Yellen doesn't seem to understand that. She makes this very clear assumption that high taxes are good. She's wrong. They're not good. My fellow Christians are very familiar with the scripture that does give some qualification for taxes. It's when Jesus is tested and asked whether his disciples pay the temple tax. He says, "Let me see the coin." And he sees whose image is on the coin. And he says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." And that does justify taxation. But we miss the most important part of the phrase, which is the next phrase that Jesus utters, "and give to God what is God's." What does he mean by that? He means that you go to God because your image, God's image, is on you. And so that's the most important part of the scripture. Caesar's image is on the coin, so the coin goes to Caesar. God's image is on you, so you go to God. So why do we allow taxing at all? We allow taxing because we live in a fallen world. And in a fallen world, we have to be protected from evil. Corporate taxes. The graph you're looking at comes from my book that I teach with at Dallas Baptist University. It's written by Gregory Mankiw and it's called Macroeconomics. But I could take the graph from a number of different sources. It simply shows that at equilibrium, there's a lower cost and a higher supply. When taxes are added, there's a lower supply and a higher cost. This is simple economics. You don't have to study economics to know that when a tax is added to a product or service, the public gets less of the product at a higher price. Thus, taxes are not good for an economy. They never could be good for an economy. A race to the bottom in taxes is good because it means people pay lower taxes and the economy grows. Other countries will break the cartel. They will. A race to the bottom is good when it's a race to the bottom in taxes. During the Obama administration, taxes were higher and corporations left the United States. They were called inversions. Perhaps the most well-known was Burger King allowing themselves to be bought by Tim Hortons so they could pay the lower corporate tax in Canada. This will recur. It always does. Look, you can change economic policy, but you can't change economic law. Matter of fact, the leaders of these organizations, the CEOs and the CFOs, have made a commitment to their corporation that they must operate in a way that benefits the corporation. Well, why would they stay in a country with a higher tax rate when they could move to a lower tax rate country? They have this commitment to do so, and they will. Inversions will pick up if this tax cartel, as Ms. Yellen is trying to establish, comes about. I've talked about this taxing with my students, and I've considered taxing their grades. And they all agree that at some point they would stop coming to class. Wouldn't you? Why would you come to class if everyone's going to get the same grade? This is covered in a book by Ayn Rand called Atlas Shrugged. And I say to my students, at some point you will shrug. At some point American corporations will shrug. We all shrug at some point when taxes get too high. Deadweight loss. I asked my students the other day, do you think this deadweight loss thing is something just made up by our textbook author Gregory Mankiw and foisted upon you by Professor Arnott? Because you never see it in the media. Why is it when you read all these stories quoting President Biden, quoting Treasury Secretary Yellen, nobody talks about deadweight loss, but we talk about it in the classroom. The diagram in front of you now shows the purple area that is deadweight loss. You don't have to study economics to understand that as taxes increase the price, society gets a smaller quantity of goods at a higher price. What's that purple area? It's called deadweight loss. You know who gets that? No one. As taxes go up, deadweight loss goes up. The end of reason. President Biden's statement, quote, the 2017 tax cut had been bad for American competitiveness. That's a rather astounding statement. Lower taxes harm competitiveness? He's got it exactly backwards, and you don't have to take economics to understand this. The tax cut from 2017 in the Trump administration produced the lowest unemployment in the history of America since they've been recording it in 1972 among blacks and Hispanics. Does President Biden care about blacks and Hispanics being employed? because it's been clearly shown that lower tax rates employ more of them. When commenting on what the government might do about debt being assumed recently, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said, "We will have to pay the debt, but not by raising taxes, by raising growth." Ms. Yellen will presumably try to persuade Mr. Le Maire and other finance ministers that they should join the Biden administration in making their tax systems less competitive. Let's hope they aren't as self-destructive. But Mr. Le Maire understands something that Janet Yellen apparently does not, and that is that lower taxes help an economy, higher taxes harm an economy. And there's two different views of this. You either divide the pie or grow the pie. Mr. Le Maire is correct. Lower taxes grow the pie. We have a biblical command to give. There is no biblical command to take. It's as clear as this. Government must take before it can give. There are many commands to give, but none to take. The Tax Cartel. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit.